Happy New Year! We are here once again at the AXA Training Centre, and what better way to kick off 2025 than with a highly anticipated game against Manchester United. And today's was a highly anticipated press conference with Arne Slot ahead of the game. As we all know, there's been lots of talk about Trent Alexander-Arnold and Real Madrid, and obviously he was going to have to answer questions about that, and he did, and he gave us some really fascinating answers. We spoke about quite a few other things. We spoke about Virgil van Dijk, we spoke about the problems Manchester United have got and the problems of Ruben Amorim, and of course I asked him a question in relation to something that happened last season that was very, very tough for all of us, and you'll hear all about that and much more. Let's get back to the lab. So here we are, back in the lab, ready to go through with a fine-tooth comb everything Arne Slot had to say. Now, usually what we do here is we start with all of the contracts and the injury situations to get them out of the way before we get into my top 3 takeaways. But both of those things feature in the top 3 takeaways today. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Top takeaway number 1. It's business as usual for Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, obviously, we all knew that Slot was going to have to face questions about Trent because of what's happened with Real Madrid. And there was no real discernible difference in how Slot spoke about him compared to how he's spoken about him all season long. Now, some people will want to make mileage out of the fact that he refused to confirm that Trent would not be leaving in January. And I can already see the headlines now. But the reality is that that's what he's always done. It's not really his job or his position to say whether he is or he isn't, because it's not really his decision, frankly. And again, that's been consistent with how we've seen Arne Slot tackle these kind of contract questions throughout the season. I'd be surprised if he'd have done anything else. The only thing he was willing to confirm is that he will start on Sunday, which probably isn't a massive surprise to everybody. He spoke about his play. There was quite a few different questions about Trent. A few different people tried to come at it from different angles. He mentioned consistency and how that's the best way for him to improve. So once again, he was willing to talk about the good things and the bad parts of his game that he's seen this season. So not really trying to shy away from anything in terms of that. He mentioned the fact that he had spoken to him since all of this has gone on, but no, he wasn't going to tell us exactly what he said, which is as you'd expect it to be, really. But I think there were a few moments where he was clearly trying to get a message out to everyone out there, particularly I think the fans. He was spoke about how hard he's been working his arse off. He said as well, pointedly, you can tell by his performances that he's so keen to be here and is so keen to win here. Now, I think in brackets I would have put this season, but it's clear that Arne Slot wants people to understand the fact that Trent is still just as committed right here, right now, to helping Liverpool win the Premier League. Trent wants to win the Premier League this season, whether it's his last season or not. And I think that that's something that Arne Slot felt like he needed to reiterate at that point. It will be interesting to see how the Anfield crowd react to him in this game against Manchester United, particularly if he doesn't get off to a strong start. But I think from Arne Slot's point of view, he's not concerned about his player and how he'll react to all this situation. He mentioned once again the fact that the speculation with all 3 of his top stars have been going on all season long, and it hasn't really affected them up to this point. So he doesn't suspect there to be any difference. But we'll have to wait and see. This does feel like a slightly different scenario. I mean, just already we've seen out in the online world, lots of fans have started to turn on Trent and started to believe that all of this speculation around Real Madrid is of his making, and it's something that could potentially derail Liverpool's fantastic season. Slot really doesn't see it that way from what he said today, but it'll be interesting to see, as I say, how the fan reacts and whether there's any difference. Top takeaway number 2. Conor and Ibu are on the road to recovery, but Fede is still in limbo. So on the injury front there, obviously Joe Gomez was the first one who got mentioned, and he is going to be out for a few weeks, Arne Slot said, with that hamstring injury. But as of today, Friday, for those of you who may not be watching it today, Conor Bradley and Ibu Konate will be training for the first time with the team, which is massive news really to have these two potentially back in the squad. Now, what Slot did say is he was curious and interested to see how they react, because obviously we've seen previously with players, it's not just about recovering from the injury, it's how they react once you go into the intensity of team training, of playing full-size games, etc. Are they ready to go into matches as yet? But something else that Slot said afterwards is that he expected everybody to be in contention to play some part on Sunday except Gomez, which is great news because it means that the two of them may well be fit enough for the bench. It'd be interesting to see with regards to the fixtures coming up. I'm thinking of the League Cup semi-final, first leg against Spurs, then you've got the FA Cup game against Accrington Stanley, and then a massive league game against Nottingham Forest. It'll be interesting to see how they navigate those three fixtures, whether there will be substitute appearances, particularly for Konate in the first two leading up to a start against Nottingham Forest, or whether or not any of them will get a start in either of those two games. But it's great news that they are back in situ. I think we've done really well to juggle our defensive resources without them, but with obviously Tsimikas back now and ready to come in, and those two, it's suddenly looking like a really fit squad again. Which brings me on to Chiesa. Now, he wasn't name-checked by specifically, but when Slot said he expected everybody else to be in contention, that obviously includes Federico Chiesa. Now, there's been a couple of times this season where it's looked like he's back and ready to be featuring week in, week out, and then he's dropped out again, and then he's in again, and then he's out again. So we really don't know where we are with him. But it sounds like he's ready to fight for a place in the team or in the squad. The problem he's got, though, is, as I've just mentioned, the squad is bigger and stronger than it's been for a while. So where does he fit? I think most people are expecting to see the front three of Gakpo, Diaz and Salah start this game again. They've been fantastic when they've played recently. And then you think Darwin Núñez, Diogo Jota are going to be two forward substitutes. I'd put Harvey Elliott in there as well as another substitute. Then you have a substitute goalkeeper in Quiveen Kelleher. You're probably going to have one of Tsimikas or Robertson, whoever doesn't start, on the bench. You're going to have one of Szoboszlai or Jones on the bench who doesn't start. And that only leaves one substitute in place. So does it go to Wataru Endo? Are Conor Bradley or Konate going to be fit enough to come straight back in? And if so, where does that leave Chiesa? He's probably not going to start. He's probably not going to feature in this game. Now, as I mentioned, you've got those two cup games coming up, which feels like a more likely area for him to be able to get some minutes if he is, as we suspect, ready and fit to start. But it's a real tough situation for him. And I think we've seen quite a few times over the course of this first part of the season, rumours popping up, mainly from Italy, regarding the idea of him going on loan back there, and Liverpool maybe cutting their losses a little bit on this project that hasn't really worked. But it's a real strange situation at the moment. You wonder whether or not this is the right time to do that. Once we get to the end of January and we've played at least one FA Cup game, maybe two FA Cup games, if we, as I suspect, get past Accrington Stanley. I believe the fourth round is at the end of January, so before the window closes. So perhaps we'll see him play out some of those games, and maybe he will move on when it comes to the last knockings of the window. But it will be a real shame if that is what happens. But you have to understand it from a point of view, it's just not happened in the way that we'd all hoped that it had for Chiesa. And you do wonder whether or not he's going to get the chance to really kick on over the second half of the season. Liverpool have got great forward stocks now. As I mentioned, there's those five who are all fit and firing, and you do hope that none of them are going to have any injury issues between now and the end of the season. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Federico Chiesa going forward. Top takeaway number 3, Slot turns down the chance to twist the knife into Man United. Now, there were lots of questions about how poor Man United have been and the problems and the pressure on manager Ruben Amorim, and Slot was mostly empathetic, if not quite sympathetic, but he did avoid the opportunity to give them any bulletin board material. The very first question he was asked was whether he was going to rest players against a team 14th in the table, which I think it's fair to say he scoffed at that question. He wasn't going to disrespect Manchester United in that way. He still sees this as being a flagship fixture, one of the biggest ones in the Premier League, and it always will be while those two teams are still in the Premier League. He also picked out moments in some of their recent games where they've played well. He mentioned the parts of the game against Spurs. He mentioned the second half against Newcastle where they've played well. And I think for all of us in football who concentrate on results, managers and coaches, they always try to look at performances. Again, that references back to what I mentioned previously about how sometimes games can be harder to win than it looks like. Slot mentioned the small margins in low-scoring games like football. He referenced the chance that Leicester had against Liverpool when it was 2-1, and it was just after a chance that Mo Salah had to make it 3-1, and how that could have been a massive swing. So essentially, he's reinforcing this idea that we've seen from him quite a few times. There is no easy games in the Premier League. No matter how bad a team may be looking or feeling, they all have quality enough. And Slot did mention the quality in the Manchester United team on more than one occasion. Maybe not all of us fully agree with how much quality there is there, but for any of you who are out there who are worried or about any kind of complacency, you need not be worried about that. Manchester United are going to be given, as I mentioned, a healthy amount of respect from our manager. Even for those of us who have some paranoia around poor Manchester United teams playing Liverpool and getting a result that they barely deserve, particularly as they happened last season. Speaking of which, it's time for my question to Arne Slot, which referenced exactly that. Hi Arne, around this time last season, a struggling Manchester United side off the back of a few home defeats came to Anfield to face the Liverpool team looking to go top of the table. Liverpool had 34 shots that day, didn't score any of them. So what do you think is the key to making sure the dominance in the league table is reflected in the final scoreboard?
Yeah, the things I've said many times, if you want to win a game, you have to outwork the opponent. Then second of all, you need a good balance in set pieces, especially in the big games against quality players. And then if that is balanced out or that is the same, then it's mostly about the quality of the players. So if you have 34 shots, then that tells me that you need maybe a bit of luck as well then sometimes during a game. But maybe it was also really well defended by United. I don't remember the game really well, so maybe they threw themselves every time in front of a ball. That's also part of winning games. And yeah, we need to be in the best possible way prepared, because every game in the Premier League is a difficult one, but especially a game where you face quality players that I think will feel, okay, this is a chance for us to make their fans proud again. So if they do the same winning at West Ham United away, the fans will like it, but it's even more important for them to win here at Anfield. And then quality players are always dangerous if they set their mind to something. So we have to be really well prepared to beat United.
Now, it's notable, if not entirely surprising, that the first thing that Slot mentioned there about winning the game like this is working hard. And that's something that he's reinforced time and again throughout the season. But anyone who watched Manchester United against Newcastle and saw the way that Newcastle were able to dominate them physically throughout the game, you should know that this is absolutely going to be a key battleground in this game on Sunday. Now, we've heard recently from David Lynch, a great piece for all of you out there who haven't read it, about how Arne Slot has been giving Liverpool more days off this season compared to the way the Jurgen Klopp ran the ship. And maybe with the idea of trying to build up some freshness, both mentally and physically, for the second half of the season. You think that that's absolutely going to pay off in this situation, so they should all be raring to go. There has been a full 7 days, or should I say, there will be a full 7 days from the West Ham game to this game, so they should be absolutely busting a gut, raring to go, and able to cover the pitch and run as hard as they need to overrun this Manchester United team. Slot also mentioned set pieces again, which, as I previously referenced, in a low scoring game, set pieces can be a way to turn the game around. Now, we've seen lots of headlines and mileage about how bad Manchester United are in defending set pieces, but they're actually one of the better teams in scoring set pieces. I believe they've scored 5 goals from set pieces over the course of the season, which is actually more than Liverpool. So it's clear that Slot knows that that is another way where a poorer team can make mileage against a better team. But I think the other thing that I thought was really interesting was that I spoke obviously about the game last season where Liverpool had 34 shots and didn't score them. Slot mentioned the fact that maybe that was down to bad luck, but he kind of said that he hadn't really studied that game, which was surprising to me at the time because we've seen so many times about the minute detail that he's gone into in terms of his game preparation. But then I thought about it, and the reality is that how important is that game as a reference point for this season? That was Klopp versus Ten Hag. This is Slot versus Amorim, and you'd expect both teams to be doing so many different things that maybe last season doesn't matter. I think in terms of the mentality you have to have in the game, the players will have been able to take all of the important messages and the more from that game, the idea of the fact that you can't let up, you can't go into a game expecting it to be easy. You have to go out there and earn that victory, and hopefully the players will believe that and they'll know that and they'll be ready for this game on Sunday. But yeah, perhaps Arne Slot hasn't been as avid a watcher of all of last season as we suspected, and you know what, maybe he doesn't need to. So there we have it, another press conference review. I have to say, from a personal point of view, I'm slightly annoyed at myself. There were a few questions that I really should have asked off the back of some of the answers he gave. I think one in particular I wanted to ask him was about whether Joe Gomez's injury affects the ability or affects the timeline for Bradley and Konate to return, because obviously there is no real other right back option other than Konor, who currently is going to be playing centre back. So you wonder whether that injury affects the ability of the management team to give those two enough time to come back. There were a few other questions I felt like I could have asked, but someone else's question had kind of nipped off a little bit of mine, so it would have been repeating myself. And I'm very keen to make sure that Arne Slot is always thinking about every question. He's not able to say, well, I just answered that already. If you're a journalist and you're speaking to a manager and the first thing they say was, I just answered that a minute ago, then your heart drops because it's like, well, I've just wasted a question. But you know what? You live and learn for next time. I still think that Liverpool are going to be a force to be reckoned with in this game. They will be ready to face Manchester United, and hopefully we'll all be talking about a massive victory come Sunday afternoon. Now, thank you all for watching. As ever, please check out my Substack page. As ever, there will be a match report. I think most of you will have noticed I've not put out an article so far this week. There will be a match report coming up on Sunday, so keep an eye out for that. I'll see you again soon.